She was a former beautician who left the hair business for the air business. She was the first woman to win the Los Angeles to Cleveland Bendix race, and the first person, male or female, to fly the route nonstop. When the Germans invaded Poland, she asked First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt to help her get permission to train women to fly combat support. In 1943, she established the Women Air Force Service Pilots, the WASPs, to ferry aircraft from the United States to the front. After the war, she set a new speed record for propeller-driven craft, and in 1953 became the first woman to break the sound barrier. In 1964, she capped her career by setting one last record, taking the F-104 Starfighter to 1,429 miles an hour. She was Jackie Cochran, and she is a legend of air power. No one knows exactly when Jackie Cochran was born or even where. But in 1906, give or take a year, the woman who would become one of the greatest female aviators of the 20th century was born Bessie Mae Pittman somewhere in Florida. She was raised by foster parents, and though she didn't have shoes until she was 8 years old, she seemed instilled with a belief in her own destiny.
She, in many ways during that time, invented a life for herself. She would spend a lot of time alone. She would spend a lot of time dreaming about what she was going to do.
She learned how to style hair, and by the time she was 16, was something of an expert at the emerging technology of the permanent wave. She moved around a lot, and when time and space didn't put enough distance between her and her upbringing, she picked a new name out of the phone book: Cochran.
When she felt like she had exhausted her potential in Florida, she packed up her bags and went to New York City, where she got a job at a very high-end salon called Antoine's. And it was there that she really began to expand her horizons by meeting a variety of wealthy people, people whose lives were dramatically different than anything she had known before.
She arrived in New York in 1929, just in time for the stock market crash. No matter, it was the big city, and she was part of a world she had barely imagined. And the unemployed in the street did little to dampen her enthusiasm.
She became such a favorite of many of the society ladies that they would ask her to travel with them to Miami when they wintered over. And so she would travel to Miami with them and do their hair down there, and frequently she was invited to dinners and parties.
A real-life Cinderella, Cochran met her prince at one of those parties, Floyd Odlum. A self-made millionaire, Odlum was bored with society chit-chat, and when seated next to Cochran was instantly impressed that her conversation surged past the normal gossip and on to bigger things.
She opened up and told him all her hopes and dreams and ambitions and bubbled over with enthusiasm. Well, this caught Floyd's attention, and he was mesmerized by her. And it wasn't a case where this was an older man looking at a younger woman saying, "Oh, I'm going to make something of you." This was a fellow who said, "Wow, this is a gal that's going somewhere," and decided that he wanted to be a part of that and play a role in it.
He was impressed with her, and what he did when they got married, he helped her out in every endeavor that she wanted to attend, whether it's flying or business or anything like that. And he sort of used Jackie as a hobby.
Unaware of his wealth, she explained her plans of starting a cosmetics company. Odlum listened and suggested that the only way to oversee such a broad enterprise would be to get a pilot's license and fly from place to place. Within a few hours of meeting Jackie Cochran, Floyd Odlum had given her an idea that would change her life. and the history of aviation. She learned to fly in 1932 in New York, and then went west to learn more. She befriended a group of Navy pilots who taught her the Navy way.
There's no such thing as a natural-born pilot, because all pilots start out with the same level of visual acuity, hand-eye coordination, things like that. And what happened is the guy with the most experience, or gal, is the best. That's simple. And she had a lot of experience flying airplanes as a WASP during World War II, ferrying them from the factory to the operational units.
She thought of herself as a slow learner and struggled with basic flight maneuvers. But she persisted, and when she needed help, she didn't hesitate to track down the right person and ask.
I think Jackie had that undefinable something that so many pilots seem to have. And it's a combination of wanderlust and determination and a need for a little bit of glory and to kind of set yourself ahead of the pack. And probably for Jackie, that came as a result of her childhood.
In the 1930s, the place to be for an aviator who wanted to make her mark was in the private sector. The Navy and Army Air Force were starved for funding, flying outdated aircraft, confined to workaday missions like flying mail. But in the private sector, things were different. The 1930s were a time of excitement, of big money air racing and flying circuses. Jackie Cochran was part of that world. She barnstormed around the country, competing in air races and putting on exhibitions, always setting her sights on the next great challenge. She set dozens of world records, in the process befriending the elite of aviation, including Jack Northrop, Amelia Earhart, and Howard Hughes. In 1934, only 2 years after receiving her pilot's license, she became the first woman to compete in the Los Angeles to Cleveland race for the Bendix Trophy. In 1937, she came in third, and in 1938, she won what was then the biggest annual air race in the world. At the same time, she founded and operated Jackie Cochran Cosmetics. With her husband Floyd's help, but always under her own power, she kept tight control of her company.
Now, certainly marrying a millionaire helps you to achieve probably more quickly than the old-fashioned way, but she had already established herself as a go-getter. And indeed, what attracted Floyd Odlum to her was the fact that she was a go-getter.
He sponsored just about everything she wanted to do, and she was her own business lady when she set up Jackie Cochran Cosmetics and was an agent for Nina Ricci perfume, dresses, and things like that from Paris. Floyd let her run her own business, but he would help her, you know, like setting records required a great deal of support, both financially and, you know, business-wise. And so he was involved in them, and he helped her, I'd say, probably a great deal.
She oversaw the lab that developed the products, flew from city to city, selling her line to upscale department stores. When she arrived somewhere, she always took time before getting out of the cockpit to spruce up her makeup. Nominated to the committee that annually awarded the Collier Trophy for the greatest contribution for aviation, she advocated giving the award to medical doctors researching the effects of high-altitude flight. The trophy had always gone to pilots or aircraft designers, but Cochran succeeded in getting scientific research recognized. She then lobbied President Roosevelt, who for the first time committed government money to the research that led to the development of G-suits, pressurized aircraft, and oxygen masks. By 1940, aviation had become a more serious business. The Germans had rearmed and taken Austria, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and France. The British were under fire. The head of the British Ferry Command asked Cochran if she would fly a Hudson bomber from Canada to England to draw attention to the company's resupply efforts. She jumped at the chance, and despite sabotage of her aircraft and enemy fire, got safely across the Atlantic. She arrived in time to witness the Blitz and to watch London burn under the Luftwaffe onslaught. She returned to the United States with a plan to develop female pilots to help ferry aircraft, freeing male pilots for combat duty. The British were doing just that, and the program was clearly successful. She met with President Roosevelt, who seemed interested, and appealed to his wife Eleanor for help. She worked her way down the chain of command, always with lukewarm endorsements that gave her hope, if not confidence, that the plan would be adopted. She met with Hap Arnold, who said he'd get back to her, and with General Robert Olds, commander of the American Ferry Command. Olds was himself considering hiring women pilots on a contract basis, but Cochran wanted the pilots to be full members of the military, not just hired civilians. When she pressed her point, Arnold said no, the time for that had not come, but suggested she return to England and study the British experiment in female aviation. A month before Pearl Harbor, Cochran left the United States. She and 25 other American women set out to prove they could do what was, in the United States, a man's job. She was commissioned a flight captain in the British Air Transport Auxiliary and went to work setting up her American Volunteer Corps as the Germans bombed London. They ferried Spitfires and Hurricanes from factory to field, and during their 18 months of flying up to 5 flights a day, only one pilot died. In 1942, Arnold came to London and asked Cochran to return to the United States. Desperate for pilots, he asked her to set up the women's command she had advocated. It took her a month to put her British affairs in order and return home. She returned to find that Olds had been doing what she had not been allowed to do.
Well, she hit the roof when she got back and discovered that something had been done in her absence that was not based on her blueprint. So she went to every office in Washington that would open its door and let them know what she thought of it.
She was a very aggressive gal, and basically when she wanted to do something, she did it. You didn't want to get between her and it.
Arnold offered to shut the women's air ferrying service down, but Cochran convinced him to wait. She needed time, she said, to study the situation and figure out the best course of action. In September, she went to work in Arnold's office. Her job was to train as many female pilots as she could, so that those pilots could take over non-combat roles, freeing experienced male pilots for combat duty. Word leaked to the media that the famous Jackie Cochran was setting up a flight school for women. In a matter of weeks, before she had a field, planes, quarters, or trainers, she had 25,000 applicants. In August 1943, she was named director of the Women's Air Force Service Pilots, the WASPs. Her embryonic training program merged with the existing Women's Ferry Pilots program, and while not technically a part of the military, it seemed as though Cochran was well on the way to getting women into the Army Air Force. She set up operations in Texas, eventually moving to an abandoned facility near Sweetwater. Before she left, Arnold called General Barton Yount, the commander of the Fort Worth Training Command. "Barton," Arnold shouted into the phone, "Jackie Cochran will be down there in a few days, and I want her to have everything she wants." Jackie Cochran arrived in Texas in late 1943 to start training her female pilots. Almost as soon as word of her program got out, she found herself in a fight for her political life. Several powerful members of Congress didn't think it right that women were training to fly military aircraft. They argued that Cochran's WASPs were taking jobs from men with families to feed. It was an absurd claim in the middle of war-caused labor shortage, but it was a claim that resonated. In a nation still scarred by the Great Depression, members of Congress quickly lined up against Cochran. She also had another, perhaps more surprising adversary, Colonel Ovida Culp Hobby. The commander of the Women's Army Corps, Hobby assumed that if the WASP became part of the military rather than a women's auxiliary, they would come under her command. While Cochran wanted the WASP to be part of the Army Air Force, she would have none of Ovida Culp Hobby as her commander. Part of that was personal animosity. She referred to Hobby as the woman I love to hate. But among flyers at the time was also a general belief that aviation was not well understood by the Army as a whole. It was a given that the Army Air Force would, after the war, spin off into its own service. Why, Cochran reasoned, allow the WASP to be absorbed into the regular Army when they would just be made independent after the war. The result was an uncomfortable compromise. Cochran retained control, but the WASP stayed civilian. Hobby made sure that the WASP remained obviously non-military. They weren't issued uniforms, for example, and when Cochran complained, Hobby saw to it that they got only Women's Army Corps coveralls. It was a not-so-subtle hint about who controlled women in the military, and a reminder that the WASPs were mere civilians.
Jackie Cochran was not a mild, meek person. She had a steamroller personality. If she wanted something, she absolutely let everybody know she wanted it and how she expected to get it.
Cochran, of course, was not without resources. She had a WASP uniform designed at the exclusive Bergdorf Goodman department store in New York, and then convinced Arnold to pay to have them mass-produced.
In terms of the WASPs, she was absolutely unwilling to let anybody play a role that was the opposite of what she had envisioned for this group. So she went in and fought her way into a position of authority and then kicked into the training and really conducted the entire organization as a military operation.
Their performance record was magnificent. They shuttled thousands of aircraft around the country, freeing hundreds of male pilots for combat duty. They handled the most difficult planes, demonstrating that women could fly temperamental, physically demanding aircraft, and compiled accident records that compared favorably with men's. She believed wholeheartedly that she was making progress, and in December 1944, Congress gave her reward. They ordered the WASP disbanded. The women, Congress decided, should go back to their place. Not only would the WASP not be absorbed into the military, they would not be allowed to continue flying as they already had, no matter how successful they had been. The more than 1,000 pilots the WASPs had trained in less than a year were given their walking papers.
I was at the, I think, 25th anniversary of the disbandment of the WASP, which occurred in 1944, and this is later. I'm up at Edwards, so I came down. She said, would you come down and give a talk to the WASP about current, kind of flying and airplanes and technology? So I did, and I met probably there's about 400 of them down there, and they were really, really classy gals. I'd never met too many of them. But see, there were so few of them that were able to continue flying after they were disbanded, that very probably not over a half a dozen that I knew that kept on flying. Jackie was one of them.
Jackie served out the remainder of the war as a consultant to Hap Arnold. Working as a magazine correspondent, she was the first American woman to enter Japan after the end of the war. At the end of 1945, the president signed an order awarding her the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest honor. The president, she was told, was looking forward to pinning the award on her. She said in response that the only person she'd accept it from would be Hap Arnold. If he couldn't do it, they could mail it to her. You don't refuse the president, Arnold told her aghast. Well, I did, Cochran answered. And in a Pentagon conference room, Arnold gave her the medal. Cochran went back to racing. She bought a surplus P-51 and entered the 1946 Bendix, and came in second after a harrowing cross-country run that left her bruised and bloody. She ran the cosmetics business she had started in the 1930s between races and became a leading agitator for a separate Air Force. She spent thousands of her own dollars on advertisements pushing for an independent Air Force and raised more than $100,000 more to lobby and campaign. She used her fame and her husband, Floyd Odlum's connections, to open doors that might otherwise have been closed. And when the National Security Act of 1947 created an independent Air Force, she deserved much of the credit. 3 years later, the Harmon Trophy Selection Committee named Cochran the most outstanding woman aviator of the 1940s.
And then when she conned her way into Canadair, who her husband, Floyd Odlum, owned quite a bit, and they hired her as a test pilot. She said, I'm going to fly an F-86 and set some women's speed records, and men's too.
Flying a Canadian-built F-86 in 1953, she became the first woman to fly faster than the speed of sound. She became the first woman to fly a jet across the Atlantic in 1962. And on a single stunning flight from New Orleans to Hanover, Germany, she set 69 intercity, intercapital, and straight-line speed records. In 1963, she capped her career by flying a Lockheed Starfighter faster than any woman had ever flown before.
Funny thing was, when Lockheed had a press conference down at Los Angeles International Airport, we took a F-104 and I flew her wing down there. Well, when she landed, I went on around, was going on back to Edwards. I didn't want to get involved in the press conference. And I went over to the ground control frequency. I heard her check in with the ground control at Los Angeles International Airport. And then they called her and she didn't answer. And they called her again, she didn't answer. I said, if you look through your binoculars, you see she got her helmet off, combing her hair. And because she never got out of that airplane, that she didn't look like she stepped out of Vogue magazine.
Jackie and Chuck were extremely close. Jackie, in many ways, pushed and goaded Chuck to the point that he frequently threw his hands up and was going to walk away from her forever, but could never quite do it because she was a dynamic force, and he was a dynamic force. And I think they both understood the magic of flight, the competitiveness of flight. They both had that element that you see in test pilots and fighter pilots.
In 1971, Jackie Cochran was inducted into the National Aviation Hall of Fame. In 1977, Congress passed a resolution recognizing the WASP contribution to the American war effort in World War II.
She set one heck of a lot of records in airplanes, and a lot of those records still stand. And I think she really made a big difference in women in aviation, which today there's thousands and thousands of gals that are flying in the military, airlines, private aviation, and she probably is largely responsible for their success.
In 1979, the members of the WASP began receiving their military discharge papers. It had taken some time, but Cochran had succeeded. She and her WASPs had indeed become a part of the military.